Architects with Holy Hell. This is obviously a very different atmosphere, a very different feeling, a very different scene than it was 2 years ago. Whenever the last album from Architects was released, All Our Gods Have Abandoned Us, of course. Whenever that was released, it was a celebration. It was the first time that I had ever covered these guys in a video. That's not the reason for the celebration. It was because it was a good album, not to mention everything seemed rather bright in the Architects camp, except for Tom Searle's condition, which eventually did worsen, and he unfortunately passed away after his 3-year struggle with skin cancer. And then there was a big unknown period. What was Architects going to do? The band themselves didn't even know if they were going to continuing, stating at one point after getting off stage, this could be the last time that we do this. And the band was able to power through and decided to release another album, go back into the studio, and worked a little bit with some of Tom's old material, or at least on one song entitled Doomsday, which we got as the initial single for this album. And it's a very good song as well, deep into the final playlist. Originally, it didn't make the cut, but, you know, minds were changed, which is very thankful considering it is a pretty well-designed track. But we have to start at the beginning of this disc, which is really very much a very painful album to listen to, but not because of the weakness of the material. It's actually quite strong, but because of that being the theme. The theme is explorations of pain. This is a band that's still mourning, it's still wounded, and so very much this is an album of vulnerability, and it is seen very quickly with the opening track, Death Is Not Defeat, which definitely has a little bit more of that redemption vibe to it. It has a little bit more of an acceptance vibe to it whenever you just examine those 4 words. But still, as you examine this album lyrically, and also examine this album a little bit psychologically, you can cite and tell the connection between that sort of very where do we go from here period after losing somebody that we care about so greatly. And of course, Tom's brother Dan is a part of this band, so it obviously had to have affected him the most. But going into Hereafter and Moral After All, we're getting into some theological discussion about death and pain, and what do we do? Where do we go? There's a lot of that vulnerability scattered about this disc. And musically speaking, this is definitely a far cry from what Architects were whenever they first burst onto the scene. This is a band that feels like they're doing the metalcore sound to the T, but adding some electronic elements as well. And you might say, well, what makes their style of doing this a little bit better than others? And I think it's just the overall style. I think it's the fact that this feels like it bleeds emotion as opposed to just being done to sort of cash in on the fact that electronic music has a little bit more popularity these days. This isn't being done just as a way for a band to try to boost their sales. It's instead a very realistic decision. It's being used to utilize a little bit more atmosphere, kind of break up loud or aggressive moments of song in order to give it a bit of a break. And it also feels like it makes a lot of sense emotionally, since that electronic sound does leave a little bit of vacancy. The vacancy that very easily could be called back to the loss of their friend Tom. And as a result, whenever you do get those moments, those sort of empty or vacant feelings do kind of emerge. And this album can sometimes be a bit sorrowful to listen to, despite the fact that it does have such an aggressive edge to it, which can be seen on the title track, Holy Hell, and then going into Damnation. Now, as we get down to Royal Beggars or Modern Misery, Dying to Heal, these are songs that are maintaining the theme. So, unlike albums that we've talked about recently, such as the new Disturbed album, they went all in with this idea, and you can definitely tell how that changes the overall result of the album. They went all in with this, and it feels cohesive. Not to mention, it also feels very smooth whenever you listen to it. Not a lot of jagged edges. There's not as many surprises, but as a result, that actually paints this album in a better light. But at the same time, they also believed in the strength of their experiment and the strength of their new songwriting, basically what they were going to be from here on out, considering Tom was also one of their, if not the principal songwriter of Architects. So this is a sound that was going to evolve one way or the other. And that aggression definitely comes out and showcases itself, and it should. This is a band that's very angry, or a band that's very much in mourning, has loss. And what do you do sometimes in those situations? You lash out. And these tracks certainly showcase that, while also exploring a lot of different philosophical ideas of pain. We get to Doomsday as track number 10, which is an excellent little throwback, not to mention it's nice to hear something that Tom worked on. It's a fitting tribute, but really a wasted hymn. The very final cut on this disc explores the elements of a little bit more of the electronic approach, while also feeling a little bit more like a conventional rock song, one that is not really knee-deep in the metalcore anguish. Instead, it's almost like the band did their own citing or taking of the last material that we got from Linkin Park, but this feels very much real, not to mention it's asking some very difficult questions. The overall composition of it is not trapped in a bubble, instead feels very free and very uneasy at that, and that uneasiness is what helps paint this as such a unique closer, one that they really needed on an album like this, where the whole entire disc was going to feel a little bit different, and the whole entire disc was going to feel a little bit uneasy. So that unease certainly works to Architect's advantage, because it's reality. It's not an album that feels like it's faking its emotion. It's instead approaching things very realistically. And that's the strength of this disc. That's the strength of Holy Hell, and why Architects continue to be a group that's on so many people's different radars, is that they do deliver just a good, honest product. They don't try to embellish things just to try to, provoke or cause different emotion. They instead just let it happen naturally, and it works in their favor. This disc doesn't have a lot of flaws. It's one that, in its middle portions, does seem to get a little formulaic, but again, since they're going forward with a bit of a new theory or a bit of a new songwriting style, the fact that they went all in with it is good. You're going to run into the problem of it seeming a bit formulaic, especially whenever it's your first real foray going all in with something like this. It's not something you're going to immediately pick up, and that's not a problem. It's an album that I would give a 22 out of 32. This is a really good disc. It's one that has a lot of emotion that's attached to it, and again, as I've said, that really feels like its strength. The fact that they're being very honest about this, as opposed to immediately getting into the idea of we will move on, we will redeem. They instead explored those very uncomfortable emotions first before doing that, and we know that they're going to move on. There's really no choice. But the fact that they went with the more uncomfortable routes takes some balls. And again, I think that's what sets Architects a little bit ahead of a lot of other traditional metalcore bands that we've seen in this decade. But I don't know what you think about Holy Hell by Architects. Let me know in the comments below. And hey, if you want to learn how to play the guitar and maybe become just as good as Tom was someday, top link in the description box is for Guitar Tricks. They are offering 14-day free trials for online guitar lessons. They have various styles that you can choose from heavy metal to jazz to blues to country, whatever your heart desires, whatever you wish to learn. Scope out the link in the top half of the description box, and if you like what you see, please give it a try. It might be something that will cause me to review a piece of work that you were on in the future. Thanks, I'm Cover Killer Nation, and have a great day.